Hi, everyone. My name is Cyndy McDonald, and I'm an instructor for the UCLA College Counseling Certificate Program. And it is my privilege to bring to you experts in all the different areas of higher education and college advising so that you can learn not only from me, but from other people. And so today I'm so honored to have as my guest Susan Lawson. And Susan is a consultant in Canada. And we're going to talk about what's different between the US, Canadian, and other English speaking programs. But in particular, we want to focus on the Canadian education system because we're finding more and more students are applying to multiple systems, especially if you're working with international students. They're going to be applying not only to programs in the UK, but Canada, US, maybe Australia, other places. So we want to dig into that and learn a little bit more. I'm not as versed on the Canadian program. So Susan, I know you are. So welcome. Glad to have you speaking with me today. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Cyndy. I'm happy to be with you and to share my knowledge. Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about your background. What led you to become a college advisor?
Sure. I feel like as with almost or a significant number of consultants, I was not in the educational realm, but the whole process started as my children were going through looking for colleges and universities. And as you mentioned, we are in Canada, but I have three children who are all athletes, and so we were looking at US colleges as well. So I toured colleges with them. And in the process of that, I realized how much I actually love higher education. And I'm a bit of a closet nerd. And so it just played into this part of me, and this spark was ignited. I still love touring campuses. It never grows old. And that's where it came from. So when I started my business, initially, I thought I would be working with Canadian students who wanted to be NCAA athletes and apply to the US. It definitely changed and morphed over time. And I would say 30% of my students apply to the US, but 70% are actually applying in Canada. And the Canadian university application landscape has become much more complex over the past 3 to 4 years. So there's a greater need now for consultants in that area.
That's very true. And I think that's one of the things as a college advisor is keeping up with that and seeing those changes and those trends and being able to work with students and the families and help them navigate all of that. So tell what is different about the Canadian program? What is you can you describe that landscape?
So the Canadian higher education landscape, almost all of our institutions are publicly funded, so funded by the government. We have large research institutions that are probably known to a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast. They're in the world rankings. So University of Toronto, McGill, University of British Columbia, everyone seems to know those schools. But what I don't think people don't realize is we have incredible universities that are spread across the country and aren't that large. Queen's University, Waterloo, University of British Columbia, University of Victoria, Dalhousie University. There are so many more than what people know, and I think that's important to get out there. The I guess the other thing that's different about Canadian higher education as opposed to the US is our schools tend to not be liberal arts colleges. So you're applying to a university. I was racking my brain trying to think of a undergraduate only institution. I can think of one in Nova Scotia. There are probably others. And we do have colleges within larger universities, but our higher ed system tends to be one of universities, not strictly undergraduate colleges. So I think that's another big difference. I think too,
So let's stop for there for a second. So you mean that they offer undergrad and graduate, like masters and PhDs and
yes,
professional programs? Is that what you mean? Or
yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Often when we're looking at US culture, it's like, oh, it'd be great to get research opportunities there because there are no graduate students. Whereas at a Canadian school, you will have graduate students there. So yeah,
That makes sense.
that's a bit of a difference. And I guess the other thing is too that although people, have heard of the larger universities, it's really important when you're looking at Canadian schools to look at the program within the university. And that's as a consultant how I operate is I'm always looking through the lens of what's the program you want to study and let's find the great universities that have that program and offer it in a way that appeals to you. So I think that definitely is a different way of looking at universities and colleges than in the US, I think.
So do students have to declare a major when they apply to a university in Canada? Do they apply like in the UK, I know you have to apply under a particular program or, we would say major. Is that the case in Canada as well? Or is there such a thing as an undeclared major?
There are very few undeclared majors. So you're either looking at, engineering, business, nursing, kinesiology, or some schools have a faculty of arts and science, some have a faculty of science and the faculty of humanities and a faculty of social sciences. It's not the same across the board. And you are applying to a program or an intended major within that faculty. So say you're applying to the Faculty of Arts, but you want psychology and perhaps you want co-op. At some schools, that is a specific program that you're applying to. Other schools, you would apply to arts and science and identify your major, knowing that you could change it when you get there. So it's a bit more like the UK system, but not quite as structured, where you decided 2 years ago that's what you're studying and that's what you're going to do, and there's not a lot of room for movement. Yeah.
So it sounds like, and that was my next question, is that you can change, or some programs allow you to change and some you can't, or what is that distribution in terms of?
So if you went in, say, as a sociology major and you took first year economics and perhaps a math course, you could transfer probably to be an economics major. Or similarly, if you were in the sciences and were studying chemistry but took bio first year, and you could transfer into be a bio major. So there is some flexibility around that. It's more difficult, I think, as is the case in US schools too, like to transfer into something like engineering. That's very, very difficult. Kinesiology, nursing, those very specific programs are difficult.
Yeah, sometimes people try to think of it as a backdoor way. I'll get in through the easy major and then I'll just transfer. And colleges are very well aware of that kind of
Right.
approach. So they guard against that. So we mentioned the UK. So let's talk a little bit more about the differences between the US and the UK, and even Australia. What are you familiar with Australian system at all?
I'll be perfectly frank. I only know it when I work with students who want to apply to professional programs in
Oh,
Australia,
mhm.
because the distance is just so far. People tend not to apply there for
Yeah,
undergrad.
that's fine. So between the US and the UK and Canada, let's just go to the UK and Canada. So we've already mentioned some differences. What are some other differences?
So the UK has a lot of direct entry professional programs like veterinary, science, medicine, law. Canada does not have direct entry professional programs. So that's a big difference. Another thing is the degrees in the UK tend to be 3-year degrees,
Mhm.
meaning you're graduating with your full bachelor's in 3 years, unless you're in Scotland, whereas in Canada, for the most part, ours are 4-year degrees, like you would have in the US. You can get a 3-year Bachelor of Arts, but almost all the degrees tend to be 4 years. So
Mhm.
that's one of the differences. The other difference would be what we talked about, the sort of rigidity around the major. There's a bit more flexibility in Canada than you would have in the UK.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So the UK has the UCAS system. What does Canada have to apply?
So Canada's a bit of like playing hide and seek. There there isn't one uniform system. So that's a huge difference. You've got the Common App in the US, you've got the UCAS in the UK. Ours really is done regionally. So the province of Ontario, which is where I live, and that's where the city of Toronto is, the city of Ottawa is there, that the applications are done through a system called OUAC or OUAC, and it's a centralized system for all of the applications to Ontario universities. And that's for domestic students as well as international students. The province of British Columbia, which has cities like Vancouver, Victoria, um, that province, it's done through a process called Apply BC, British BC meaning British Columbia. But other schools like McGill, you apply directly on McGill's website. Or if you're applying to Dalhousie, you apply directly on their website. So the system is not uniform across the country. And that's what can make it challenging for people, I think, to navigate that system.
Yeah, yeah. And it sounds similar to what we used to have in the US, years ago, and we still have. I mean, you can only apply to University of California through the UC app. You can only apply to California State University through the Cal State app. You have
Right,
applied Texas. Florida, you just apply individually, and if they're on the Common App, great, but if they're not, yeah.
right,
So
right.
so that's important to
But
know, and it
that
helps counselors. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's definitely and the other big difference is on UCAS or the Common App, there's the one big essay, right? UCAS has the essay, which is why you need to know where you're applying because it's all about your academics, what you want to study, and it's going to all five schools to which you're applying. The
Right.
US has the Common App with the general Common App essay. There are no essays within OUAC or Apply BC.
Oh.
So you find out about your supplements and your essays later. So that's why it's a little bit of hide and seek. An exception to that is when you apply to University of British Columbia, as you're applying, your essay questions will come up within the body of the application. But for the other schools, you apply through, say you're applying through OUAC, it's like a central processing center. Your application goes out to all the universities. They then email you back, giving you the information to log into your operating system. And that's where you find out whether or not you have supplements and what the supplements are. So,
So not everybody gets that has to submit supplements, just
no,
some
not
students.
Yeah, there are some
And does
programs where you don't have to submit supplements at all, and it's a changing landscape. So there might not have been a supplement last year, but as programs get more competitive, there might be a supplement this year. So we never really know until, it might say on the website that there will be a supplementary application, and some of them do list the questions, but not very many. So it's something that emerges as we go through the application process.
so you really have to encourage students to check their emails with
Oh,
that, because that's the only way
absolutely.
they're gonna know you're not gonna get that email.
Exactly. And that's one of my, biggest messages I send out when they start applying in the fall is check your email. That's the only way you're going to get this information. I don't get it, your parents don't get it. And also read the whole email. They'll say, "Oh, well, I got the email that said they got my application," but they don't read to the part that tells them to log into the operating system and find out what supplements they have. So they really need to be proactive in the process.
So do those supplements tend, you mentioned that it might be more competitive programs. Do they tend to be more from the science, engineering, business aspect, or and not as much with the humanities, social science, or is it across the board?
So at University of British Columbia, the University of British Columbia has the most holistic application process, similar to the US. So there will be a supplement for everyone applying to UBC. There will be different questions depending on what faculty. So business students get different questions, some different questions, engineering students get some. The other programs tend to be, like you said, business, engineering. There are some very niche health sciences programs, nursing programs, education programs. So those, computer science, anything that's becoming more and more competitive, you will see a supplement. And the trend that we started to see last year and we're really seeing this year is the supplements being administered by a company called Cura Talent that you might have heard of. And in essence, what they are is they're being done in real time by the students. So they're
Oh,
logging into this Cura Talent where they've registered and they have their the ID and they know who they are. They might be given a verbal question, 60 seconds to prepare, 90 seconds to upload, and a written question, 10 minutes, 20 minutes to write your answer, upload, and it's over. So it takes, in a lot of ways, it levels the playing field, but it can
mhm,
also be nerve-wracking for students because they feel like there's a
mhm.
lot resting on it. So
Yeah.
that was a system that a few schools did before. Waterloo, University of Toronto, McMaster University used it before, but now a lot more schools are using that process.
Do you think that's because of the advent of AI?
I think that's a lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. We've been hearing a lot about that aspect. So when they ask for those supplements or they ask for those questions, have those questions, have students answer those questions, what are they looking for? Are the students supposed to be very direct and fact oriented, or are they supposed to give a
Um,
story or their values? What goes into that?
Again, it depends on the program. I mean, I think first of all, they're looking on a basic level to make sure that you can communicate, you can formulate ideas in a logical manner. Um, Often it is, talk about your weakness that you've overcome. Tell us about a challenge you faced. How did you overcome? Very similar to US college application questions. But then there will be perhaps more specific ones in the area of engineering or environmental science or business, talk about a issue in the business community right now, describe the issue, how would you solve it using business principles, or what's a world issue right now that you would like to solve through engineering principles. So those are some of the types of things. I will say in the past, as nerve-wracking as it is for the students, I've never had a student come back to me and say, "Oh, that was just awful." Because they're talking about themselves and their values and their knowledge and things they care about. So,
Mhm.
that's how I try and reassure students.
Mhm.
But it has led to a lot of procrastination, this application cycle.
So what is the application cycle? What's the like when does it start and how are the deadlines set up? What does that landscape look like?
So tends to open again, it's a bit different regionally, but I'll say, especially for internationals, it opens a bit earlier, tends to open the middle of September. These supplements are being done now, October, November, December. Um, the OUAC system closes mid-January, so that's when you have to have submitted your OUAC. But really, it's all done in the fall, and these supplements are all done in the fall. And then admissions, come out in various stages, again, depending upon how competitive the program is and
Mhm.
depending on whether there's a supplement, because they need a bulk of the supplements to have been done before they can make a decision on their applicants, right? And also how many international students will be taken,
Mhm.
etc. So sometimes the tricky thing is that very competitive Canadian programs will often not release a decision until April or May because
Mhm.
our decision date is June. But
Um,
when you have that US decision date of May 1st, they can, butt up against each other. But I think often they will give US students a decision prior to that,
mhm.
and also make them decide prior to the June 1st deadline, knowing
Mhm.
that they're making that decision in the US by May 1st anyway.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. So do you find it's more of a rolling admissions, like um, where as they get their things in and you have a bulk of applications that those decisions will start coming out, or, several times, especially here in the US, regardless how many applications come in, they will start releasing their decisions, at a certain time in March or April or things. But we do have rolling admissions particularly for less competitive programs.
Right.
So,
So Again, it's an it depends kind of thing.
Mhm.
So smaller schools on the East Coast do have rolling admissions, and they will admit students if they have good grade 11 marks on the basis of their grade 11 marks.
Mhm.
So that's really nice for students who are nervous or anxious about getting accepted anywhere, that if they can get those applications out early, they can hear quite early in the cycle. Other
Mhm.
schools will have sort of an early look deadline. So for UBC, that's December 1st. For University of Toronto, that's December 2nd. So that if you get your app and all the pieces in place by those dates, then you'll hear,
Mhm. Mhm.
earlier. Um, but but I think they really do want to see at least the midterm grades from 12th grade,
Oh,
because our
uh-huh.
admissions process is so much more based on the 11th and 12th grade marks and the prerequisites that are required for the courses that, if they need physics and calculus, they want to see your midterm grade in those. But for a STEM type program, right? Or a business program that's very quant focused, they're going to want to see at least a midterm grade, probably from calculus.
Okay. And is midterm in Canada usually December, January? When does midterm usually
Um,
your school
so for
system?
students that are semestered, it's just around now in November or perhaps last week. But if they're full year students and not semestered, then it would be in January. Yeah. So there's no date that you're waiting for to get your admissions, and schools will do it in blocks and in cycles. So, if you haven't heard by December or January, there's no need to panic.
Mhm.
It means they're just looking for more information and they need to get that information from the student.
Well, I
Uh,
think it sounds like a part one, part two type of process. And there are some schools here in the US that do that
yeah,
as well. It's not as well known, but in many ways it makes a lot of sense because then
yeah,
you get that part one in and then they know they can determine if you're really serious with that part two. Because if you never turn in the supplement, then
right.
then you're done. It's like, but
Exactly.
um
We raised something there that I really, really did want to cover off that we haven't talked about yet, which is the prerequisites.
mhm.
Because I know in the US, students who are your state school is going to dictate what courses you need to have taken over your high school curriculum. And or the highly selectives will have a certain courses they want you to have taken over your 4 years of high school. But the Canadian system is different and more like the UK in the way that, if you're applying to a business program, they probably want you to have grade 12 English and either grade 12 calc or pre-calc. And those are non-negotiables, but they don't care about the others. So they don't care if you have a social science or a science or
Oh.
that.
Mhm.
So you really need to do your research early and make sure that you're going to have the prerequisites for the courses that you are applying to. Especially in the STEM programs and the business programs, because pre-calc will not always cut it for a business program, whereas I know in a lot of US schools it will
Mhm.
be enough. So some of them are going to require calculus. And you'll find that on the international site of the website, right? For
Mhm.
or within the major, what they're looking for.
That's a very good point, and that is very important to know and understand because there is a core curriculum a lot of schools and school districts and K-12 has, and that doesn't always align with others. I know in Germany, like by the time you get to high school, you're maybe taking three or four classes, but they're very intense, and so it's a much different system. What about testing, Susan? Do our students, if they have AP or SAT, I know sometimes those are prerequisites. They won't even look at you if you don't have a certain testing score. You have to be above a certain level. So how does that look?
So as the advent of test optional occurred in the US, Canada followed suit. So I've been working with a few US applicants this year and was researching all of the application requirements, and all the schools that I researched for her, which are sort of, the major ones you apply to in Canada, are all test optional this still. But if you have test scores that you're pleased with, of course you would submit them, or AP scores. Um, And some schools like McGill and U of T do really like to see AP scores coming from students. Or again, if you're in the IB curriculum, they
Mhm.
will want to see those
Okay.
scores. I think the exception is University of Toronto Engineering wants to see SAT or ACT scores, or if you don't have them, they want to know why.
Oh. Uh,
So, but again, that's going to be something to keep an eye on, right? Just as it's changing in the US, is Canada going to follow suit and say, they're writing them in the US now, so we're going to ask for them
yeah,
again.
and we're seeing more schools are
Right.
coming back to the
Yeah,
testing.
yeah.
So that's um okay. Well, that's very helpful. So what about if they're applying and then they're considering and they're seriously considering schools in Canada, how do the visas work?
So it's called a study permit.
Okay.
Um, and the student applies for it once they have accepted an offer from a Canadian university. So then there's an online, it's on the Canadian government website. You can apply for it online and you would submit your letter of acceptance stating the tuition, the dates you're going to be attending the school, the name of the program. But you also need a letter of attestation, a provincial letter of attestation. So that would be from the province. Like a state, but we call them provinces, where the school is that you want to attend, again, stating your name, the date you're attending, and confirming that there is a place in that program for you at that school. The past year, the Canadian government has reduced the number of study permits that it will be issuing. They're going to be reducing it again next year. And they are allocated to different institutions. So I don't have the numbers on that, but
No, that's fine.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
but they are being allocated to different institutions.
So that sounds like another part of the process that needs to be included as part of that transition. It's like once you're admitted, that's not the end of the story. There's a
No,
lot more that. So, in addition to the visa, what else should students or families be
um,
thinking about?
well, and one other thing is there are a tremendous number of dual citizens. So whether
Mhm.
these are young people who were born in Canada and then their parents moved to another country, or they have a parent who was Canadian citizen, and has taken out citizenship for their child, those students are Canadian citizens. And the amazing thing about that is that so they don't need a study permit because they are Canadian citizens. But even though they don't live in Canada, they pay our domestic tuition rate as a Canadian citizen, which is different from the UK, where, if you're a UK citizen but living outside of the country, you don't pay domestic tuition. So that's a huge bonus for dual citizens or Canadian citizens applying to Canadian
Oh, yeah,
universities.
yeah.
And one
What's
more
the
thing,
difference
oh,
between what's the difference between international and domestic tuition? Is there a huge difference in the cost?
it's a big difference. Yeah, it could be, our domestic tuition, I haven't looked at them this year, could be, 8,000, whereas um, international could be 20,000.
Mhm,
But
mhm,
again, it's school specific, right?
mhm.
It's very, very school specific. And one thing to be aware of always is the currency exchange rate, right? So if you're coming from a place where your currency is worth a lot more than the Canadian dollar, it's like you're getting a discount on that tuition if you're operating in your country's currency, right?
Mhm. That's true. That is a good thing to think about, and it's a good thing for parents to be aware of as well. So,
Yeah.
so if I have a student as an advisor who comes in and tells me, I want to study in Canada, which question should I ask that student?
What do they know about Canada?
That's a good question, Thurman.
You
Why
know
do you
what?
want to go to Canada?
Yeah, why do you want to study there? It's a large country, right? I mean, so you need to know, just like the US, there are time zones, there are regional differences. Um, so that's a really important thing. Do you want to be in British Columbia where there are mountains? Do you want to be on the prairies, Alberta, Manitoba? Would you like to be in Quebec, which is very cosmopolitan, or in the city of Montreal? Do
Speak French.
how? Well, yeah, speak French. Um, and that's one thing to remember, though, that those are, McGill, Concordia, and Bishop's University are English language universities. So sometimes people panic, oh, they think they need to know French. They don't. They can operate in English there. How are you going to get there? Are there easy flights from your city? Certainly, if you're going to a major metropolitan area, you're come from a major metropolitan to a major metropolitan, you shouldn't have trouble getting there. But,
Mhm.
how are you going to get there? Do I need to take a bus once I'm in the city or somewhere like Ottawa? I might need another flight to get from Toronto to Ottawa. Just things like that. I think I would ask them, do you know what you want to major in?
Mhm.
Because it's just such an important part of the equation is in determining your school to really know what you want to major in. And it's also, when I said, what do you know about Canada? But as similar as our countries are, they are different as well. And which I think is a positive, but
Mhm.
it's somewhat of a different culture. You will have 4 seasons. You will have winter. That's not optional. So, you know, just know that as well. And
Mhm.
I think another thing to think about Canadian schools is that I think a student needs to be somewhat independent or a self-starter if they're going to go to a Canadian university.
Okay.
There's definitely the supports are there and the systems are in place, but you need to be proactive. So I think compared often to a US small liberal arts college, you're not going to get that coddling, nurturing kind of thing. The supports are all there, but you need to be proactive, I
You
think.
need to be the one that reaches out. Is there housing on campus in
Yes.
Canadian? Okay.
So absolutely. So, oh, that's a really good point. There are, residences for first year. You want to make sure though that it's guaranteed because I don't think as a freshman you want to be coming to a city where you don't know many people living in an apartment by yourself. But what's more traditional in the Canadian system is you're in your dorm for your first year, maybe your second year as an RA, and then students move out of dorms. And there is so much student housing around the campuses. And that's what students tend to do. They make their friends, they move into a house or an apartment, and that's very much part of the way it operates. Um,
Mhm.
but another thing to look at is, how much are the housing costs in those cities? Because there are cities that are much more expensive to live in than others. And there has been a bit of a shortage of housing in some markets as well. So you want to just make sure that exists.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
You're
I
going to
think,
find difference in Vancouver versus,
yeah.
Toronto versus some of the other
Uh,
schools that
Vancouver
might
and
be
Toronto
accessible.
are expensive cities, and it's just something to be aware of.
Mhm. Mhm. Do you find this is slightly off topic, but do you find that the degrees, like if I'm come from another country, whether it's, like we have students from Singapore or China or India, I mean, all sorts all over the world, are the degrees, the Canadian degrees considered as at an equal level as US or other four-year degrees?
Yeah,
Mm.
the short answer is yes. They really are. They're world-class institutions, been around for a long time, very well respected. There's, in terms of academia. So yeah, I don't see any issue there at all. And in fact, I work with a lot of US expats in Canada
Mhm.
who are usually working in the business community and talk to me about the grads from different schools, and they will tell me how impressed they are with the graduates from Canadian universities. So, and they also say going back to the US, they said it's actually, we would definitely look at students from those schools as well, going back.
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
yeah. And that's been my impression as I've talked to
yeah.
professionals. So it's good to hear you say that. And that's always a parent's concern when they're coming from
Mhm.
other international places, like, oh, is this going to be as valuable as another
Yeah.
degree? And it totally is. I would highly recommend that too.
And I mean, the same for and people say, what about graduate school? Will I be at a disadvantage getting to graduate school? But again, the academics have contacts in all of the universities, and for professionals, I've never had a student who is qualified have a problem coming from Canadian school getting into top Canadian, US, UK, Australian graduate programs. Yeah.
Oh, good. Oh, that's good too. That's very good. Do they recognize gap years if students are taking gap years? Is that something Canadian colleges recognize? I know the UK does, and the US, some do, some don't. Like the University of California system doesn't, allow it. So it
Yeah.
just depends.
It's certainly not as much of a thing as it is in the UK. I mean, the people in the UK really embrace the gap year experience. Um,
Mhm.
Canadians will do it for various reasons, sometimes for sports, right? Or sometimes they just, again, feel they want to mature, grow up a little bit. But that's not a guarantee. So it would be similar, I think, to the US system where you apply, you get accepted, you accept your offer, and then apply to defer for a year. But the deferral is discretionary, obviously. It's not automatic. So if you have a well-articulated reason to take a gap year, you probably will be granted that. But you want to apply early. You don't want to wait until August because they're trying to fill their spots, right? So if you want,
Right, right,
that's what you want to
exactly.
do, then you accept in May or June, tell them right away, and yeah, explain why it is you want to take a gap year.
Good, good.
Yeah.
So any other words of advice that we should share if I was a college advisor with parents or students? What would be your parting words of wisdom, Susan?
Gosh, I would just say, keep an open mind. Look at the program, not the university. I know it's hard, but don't get all caught up in the world rankings of institutions. Look behind the program and see what the strength of the program is. I think the Canadian schools offer a tremendous university experience with great academics, well-respected programs, bright students. You'll be in a bit of a different culture. So, yeah, I see it as a positive, really.
I totally agree. And it sounds like they're as affordable or even more affordable than some other programs that people can be looking at, especially here in the US.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you very much. This has been very illuminating. And I'll put some links to those application systems, in the show notes as well, so that those are available too. So thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you, Cindy. It was great. Thank you.